Well, good day, viewers. Besides Outback Adventures, personal journey through life. And what is today's video about? Today's video is a 300,000 kilometre review of said patrol. Now, normally, sorry, any background noise, caravans in the background moving about. Normally, I only ever post positive type things, but I want to do a bit of a good, bad, and ugly. And well, the patrol's not ugly, I love a little bit, so I take the ugly out. But anyway, the good and bad and the hiccups along the way. Firstly, would I change my patrol to one of the more favoured brands like a Land Cruiser? Not in your fucking life. I love my patrol, but wouldn't go backwards. Secondly, has there been issues? Yes, and that's predominantly what the story about this is. As I said, done 300,000 kilometres. When I first picked it up, I'm the second owner of the vehicle. I picked it up at 178,000 kilometres, and it had been owned by Westrack Mining and Services, or whatever they're called. They're a Caterpillar service vehicle in Kalgoorlie area, in the mines, and that's where it did all the work. So exposed to a lot of the heat and the cold, the red dust, the mud, and basically abuse that mining employees do of the vehicles, where it's probably done its regular servicing as far as your oil changes. That's probably it. It had a very, very hard life, and in the remaining distance from 178,000 through to the 300,000 kilometres that it's got now, and I'll have to put in a little picture of the dash, which can appear here, I think, and of the dash readout of the kilometres. The remaining of that distance, as much as I would like to say a charge off forward driving, most of it has had said caravan behind me, which you can see in the background over there. And and that combined weight is about 6.5 tonnes. So, you know, she's had a hard life. I do my best as far as maintenance, to do most of it myself. I find I get a better stand than using mechanics, which just put in willy-nilly things. Now, first issue, when I got it, yeah, I had to clean it because red dust was fucking everywhere. It was in the interior. It was just a nightmare. But you expect that, and the good part about red dust is when you stick your head underneath the vehicle, down there, and have a look for oil leaks, it shows it really quickly, and there was not much, with the exception of the CV joint here, was leaking diff oil, but I've fixed that. That was a fairly minor fix, so that was the first issue. Other than that, I started to do some of the tuning and throttle controls that are quite common practice for people to do with a modern forward drive, or anyone as old as here, where you've got computers controlling things and no cables to accelerators and so forth. And did a retune. You could just buy a little retune box and you add it onto it, you know, where people say, oh, I replaced the chip, and that's what they do. And yeah, that was crap. 20,000 kilometres after, 30,000 kilometres after I bought the car, that was the end of the first engine. And so the advantage is it caught fire. It blew up, oil everywhere around where the turbo and rear of the engine was. There was fire. It's not a problem. I carry a fire extinguisher, so I put that out. No fire damage, just a mess with an extinguisher. The good part about it is it becomes an insurance job under the fire theft and that part of the insurance. So no cost out of mine. Anyway, brand new Nissan motor, and both of them are the ZD30 motors, the 3 litre. And whoever has a common rail direct injection always say, oh yeah, but if you bought the direct injection, they're the problem ones, not the common rail ones. And the people with the direct injection say it's the common rail ones. Personally, it's just a 3 litre. It's a piece of shit engine. It's 20,000 kilometres later on a brand new engine, where I had it, and at that point in time I thought, from the go-get, I'm not going to muck around with that aftermarket chip which has a pre-installed map on it. I'll take it down to a dyno tuner. They can make sure that everything is running correctly. Your air-fuel ratios on every cylinder is correct. You're not pushing stupid power, so it's still a reliable vehicle, and best economy, and so forth. Did that, well, 20,000 kilometres later, so now I'm at 50,000 kilometres, 2 engines. I have never blown a fucking engine up in my life until I got to this point. 2 engines, 50,000 kilometers. So not really fucking impressed with Nissan engines. And I was a long way from fucking home. I was about 3,500 kilometers or something from home. I was in Bendigo in Victoria at a cousin's place when that happened. So what we did, I realised what had happened. I wasn't going to spend my hard-earned and put another Nissan motor. So I was going to put a Brunswick diesel, which is a Chev 6.5 litre or 395 cubic inch for the old speak, turbocharged diesel, 8 cylinders, in West Australia in there. The reason I chose them is they have been in operation for 35 plus years, and you don't stay in business that long if you ain't doing a half reasonable product. And in West Australia, which is where I'm from, these 3.5 litre diesels, 6.5 litre diesels I should say, the Nissan Patrols and the older Land Cruisers, they're dime a dozen. He's been doing it for a very long time and they're everywhere. Plus he gave me a 60,000 kilometre, 3-year brand new warranty on it. So there I am with a car that's over 10 years old, and with a brand new warranty on it. So I was happy with that sort of thing. So I resolved my engine. I've done 72,000 on the Chevy diesel. Absolutely love it. Love the V8, man. I don't know why you bother with a smaller engine. You've got to have 8 cylinders and it's got to be in a V formation. Absolutely love it. Never will go back. And on the engine, a bit of buddy information. They talk about Brunswick will tell you how great the mileage is and everything else. Well, that's just bullshit. You know, I get really crap mileage. When I'm driving around with the car by itself, I'm usually doing about 16 litres per 100, sometimes worse. And to give you an idea, 15 litres per 100. Now remember, a modern 4-cylinder car will do it between 6 and 8. 15 litres per 100. It's really easy to remember. For those who think miles per gallon, a lot of us still do, that's 15 miles per gallon. That's fucking shit mileage. And it gets worse when I tow. I'm anywhere between 22 and 25 litres per 100 when I'm towing, and I don't even want to know what that is in miles per gallon because I know it's a really bad number and it's in single digits. But I don't care. Got big fuel tanks. I just don't care. And I can control how much I spend by how fast I travel. And I'm not just talking about whether I do 100 kilometres an hour versus 80 kilometres an hour, but it's how often I stay at a campsite, for example. So that's just the enjoyment of driving this in 8 cylinders. It's just too fucking good. I will not go back. The end. Rightio. Now, issues. One of the recent ones, let's start from the back of the car because that's why I might cover everything. The back of the car, this car has 2 fuel tanks standard from the factory from Nissan, and the main tank, which is the one that the motor runs off, that one there, the tank is basically formed in 2 halves and it has a seam that wraps around it, which is either soldered or welded or however they do it in the factory. The seam had formed a leak. So that was only last year, actually, about 12 months ago. So that was it 2022 now, so midway through 2021. And so I got rid of that. Instead of putting a standard tank in, what I did, I put a long range tank. So I went from 95 litres to 155 litres. It's a Brown Davis tank fitted at ARB in Innisfail. Did a pretty good job. I'm pretty happy with that. And they also got it engineered for me and blue plated and all that sort of stuff, because you have to do that when you do these mods. Right. Going forward a little bit further, I've since put airbags in the rear suspension because you can get a leaf or coil rear sprung on these. Now, if you want extreme forward driving, leaf's the way, coil is the way to go. You get better flex, and there's a whole range of advantages for that there, and probably smoother on road as well. But I tow a caravan, as you know, and so there's a lot of weight on the back. And talking about suspension, the mining company did a 2-inch lift GVM upgrade, so she's now rated at 3,900 kilos instead of the standard one, which I think Sam Nissan's about 34 or 35 or something. It might be even 32, I don't know. But that's 3.9 tonnes, so total weight. So that means fully fueled, fully watered, fully mead, all my crap. And if I've got tow ball down pressure from a caravan, that weight as well. Maximum can only be 3.9 tonne. And so anyway, so in regards to the suspension again, I found that the suspension that they put on there was a little bit hard. It was quite jarring on the back when you're driving down the road. So without affecting the GVM upgrade, so the total weight the vehicle can be, I changed that to the bottom two load-bearing springs on the leaf springs. I changed them to, I flattened them out. I got them flattened out, and so essentially they work like helper springs now. So I keep my load rating, but the ride is a lot more comfortable. Also, as springs, leaf springs, coil springs, they all start to sag and wassail a little bit. To add to that comfort, I put 2-inch anti-inversion shackles in, and they don't give you 2-inch lift versus the standard lift. They give you about 1-inch lift, maybe 1.25 inches if you're lucky, right? So that put the spring, so the rear of the trailer, you're sitting up a little bit, which is how it should be, versus changing the whole lease and putting new springs in, because she's done 300,000 Ks. So I did that there. The advantage of what I've done is that anti-inversion 2-inch extended shackle at the rear, plus softening the rear, as in making the load-bearing lease on the leaf springs more working like a helper springs. It's far more comfortable, and I've had people that have ridden in there go, how have you made this nice and smooth and comfortable and soft and enjoyable to be in, right? So it's made a pretty big improvement, so I'm pretty happy with that. Moving further forward to the diff, I've replaced the LSD, the limited slip diff, because after a while the clutches that make it a limited slip, they do wear, and as I mentioned, 300,000 kilometers, so I went, that's gone, I'm not spending money there, I'll put a locker in. So I put an ARB air locker in. From what I've done with my R&D, they're the strongest locker on the market. You will get people go, should go an e-locker, should go an air locker. Look, there's pros and cons with each. I'm not going to go into that. I've got an air locker. ARB is the strongest on the market. I'll break an axle before I break the diff, so if I'm in a remote places, I can leave the thing locked on and I still have drive coming through those axles. Right. Moving further forward, the sub tank, which is the second one. That's an 80 litre tank. The original factory one is 95, which is now 155. But when I got it, I picked it up at auction, very, very cheap. I picked it up at $7,700 this car, so I don't mind spending money on it to get it up to speed. When I got it, it had a pinhole leak in the tank, so that was gone, and I got another one put in. Got a custom bash plate made up for it. Never had a problem since. The only problem I have had is something that happened just recently, and the patrols are known for it because you don't use the fuel from the sub tank direct to run the engine. What happens is when your main tank runs low, you push a little button on the dash and it has a transfer pump, and it moves the fuel from the sub tank to the main tank before you run the engine. And some brands like Toyotas, they actually run two completely separate systems. So when you run out of fuel on your main tank, you just flick over and you run on the fuel from the sub tank, and that runs the engine. Nissan, for whatever reason, or Toyota for whatever reason, they've chosen the different ways of doing things, and that's just the way it is. So I replaced that and done that there. I've added a bash plate over the transfer case as well to protect that from rocks when you're going through a little bit of four-wheel drive country. And if I decide to leave the caravan and go through there, you just give them that layer of protection to it. Moving forward, coming up a little bit forward. Oh, wait a minute! Before I leave the sub tank, right, I did have an issue with it. Now, Nissans are known that occasionally the sub tank light on your dash will come on and your little button becomes as useful as tits on a bull. Won't work. So the simple solution for that, and it works. I've probably done it about 4 or 5 times over the time that I've had this car, for about 6 or 7 or 8 years or whatever I've had it. Is you just disconnect the positive terminal on your battery, leave it sit for half an hour. So I do that, go get some red barista or a burger or something, and come back, connect it back up, resets the computer, problem solved, switch works, you can now transfer fuel again. That decided just recently, I'm talking about last week or so, that it was going to play ball. So that ended that real quick. So what I did, I thought, because I've been thinking about this for a while, I'll just wire in a bypass. So I'd write in a separate switch on the dash down to a relay, which then activates the pump directly when I choose to, not when the computer feels like behaving itself. And I don't need to have the engine running to do so, which you do when it's you're using the Nissan one, where Nissan factory transfer pump switching and so forth. I just go in the dash, hit the button, transfers it across, come back, job done. That's just the reason why. But moving forward, I'm now up to, as I said, I've covered the transfer case bash plate. I'm now up to the gearbox. Now, about 10,000 kilometres ago, I would have been about 290,000 kilometres into it, and so I was in far north Queensland at the time. I'm in the Pilbara area of WA at the moment. Hence red dirt that you see everywhere. Welcome to the Pilbara, gonna love the dust. The gearbox decided was it going to play. First or second gear got to the point, first gear in particular, that no matter how hard I pushed the gear lever in, it's a 5-speed manual, here going in, it would just about break my wrist as it kicked out with such violence. It was not using first gear, and I didn't have a choice. Not a major issue when I'm driving around. It's a 6.5 litre, plenty of V8 grunt, so I just take it off in second, but that was starting to fail in the same manner. So I knew to replace that. So I've replaced the gearbox, done about 10,000 kilometres in 12 months, and that's in there. So new gearbox, 290,000 kilometres, give or take a bit. And now we move forward to the engine. Now, as I said, I replaced that, and I've now got the 6.5 litre. Now, the 6.5 litre does not come through without any issues. It does have issues. Cooling is the most common issue with these things. So if I'm in a 45-degree day in the outback time of the caravan, I can have an overheated engine, or it just runs extremely high in its temperatures. Either way, it's not a good thing. What I've found through monitoring of gauges and so forth is that when the clutch fan, because it was a viscous hub clutch fan that would engage on the radiator, it's old school technology. Diesels really do use old school technology, but they pump through more air than electric fans ever can. The electric fan just can't muster up. So when the viscous hub clutch fan would kick into gear, and I'd suddenly watch the temperatures go from, I don't know, up around 100, 105, 110, which is really, really not good, right? Straight down to about 92 within minutes. So I knew the radiator was coping for it. The thermostats were allowing the water to get in, it just wasn't cooling the radiator. So the problem was solved. Gave Brunswick Diesel a call, discussed the issue, and they sent me over a solid drive for the hub. So now my radiator is permanently engaged, it's solid as a rock, no viscous hub to fail, none of that sort of stuff, which means that I can go into water up to about the wheel height. If I'm going through a river crossing, can't really go into water over the bonnet, unless of course you tarp up, but I have tarps in the back now, so that I carry for just such an occasion if I have to go through a really deep river crossing. But I tend to avoid those for the most part anyway. If it's up to the water, by the time you get your bow wave, it's normally flashing over here and it's fine. And the reason is, if that fan's pulling air like a trooper, when the water's in front, it's pulling water like a trooper. The fan's designed to move air, not water, and your blades break on your radiator fan. Not a good result. But as I said, I've had that in there for about 3 or 4 years now, that bloody solid drive hub, and I haven't gone through water that deep anyway. It's just not an issue. And that's solved my water temperature problems. Engine normally runs without the bloody caravan hooked up, somewhere around about 84 degrees, doesn't really vary that much. Sometimes I get up to 88. When I'm towing the caravan's about 88, 89 degrees, so it's well within limits, smack in there. Car doesn't, caravan doesn't, I mean the motor doesn't, piece of it. Rightio, there's a noisy van you come across, I'll just wait for a minute to go, and hopefully he's gone and you're not hearing too much of him going through the track. Rightio. Now, any other issue? The rear main seal on this seems to leak on the engine. Happened fairly early in the piece, I noticed. I was in two minds, and I still am, whether it's the sump gasket, because they use silicone when they put the sump gasket up there at the very back near the bloody bell housing, because I'm using the Nissan gearbox with the 6.5 litre. They have to have an adapter between the bell housing on the Nissan gearbox and the engine of the Chev for it to work. And the oil where it is running down on the wrong side, which I tend to think it's on the sump. Either way, it's a pain in the ass to tool it, so I haven't done it. So yeah, I lose probably about half a litre over 5,000 kilometres, and they're my servicing needs anyway. So it's not an issue. Yeah, it doesn't bother me too much. When I get under there, I wipe with the rag, it's clean. the job done. Some people seem to say, oh, it's the rear main seal, but rear main seal tends to come out of the telltale, or the little weeping hole they call it, on the bell housing itself, and it's not coming from there. Further forward, coming towards the front, starter motor. Yeah, I've just done that. Starter motors. The universal joint between the front diff and the prop shaft, at the beginning of that, there's a flange, and the universal board just bolts up to that flange. And I have 3.5 inches, or 3 inches is about 70 mils or 75 mils or something. So 3.5 inches. I've got a metric and imperial tape measure. Tape measure is in bigger numbers in inches, so I use that there. Blind man, yeah, prescription glasses. So it's easy to read. So 3.5 inches of clearance. After looking just recently, because I'll talk about this in a minute, just recently at a municipal patrol with a 4.2 litre turbo diesel, that's got 12 inches. So that's a big drop in clearance, and it's just, you don't get a choice. On the 6 cylinders, and I haven't seen a bloody 3 litre of late, it's an inline engine. You can put the starter motor higher up to get the clearance, where on a V8, because it comes down to V, sump, starter motor goes there, you don't get a choice. So you lose ground clearance, or not ground clearance, but clearance between your starter motor and whatever below it. And in my case, it's the universal joint / flange onto the front differential. I've checked my bump stops. My bump stops have 3 inches of clearance before they compress. So consequently, if you drive down gravel tracks, which I tend to do a lot when I go to remote travelling places I go to, for the most part, the washouts on the roads, I manage to slow down for them. You don't want to hit them at 60 kilometres or faster. But sometimes you get caught out, and it's that sudden compression of the springs which go up, hit your bump stops, compress the bump stop, and then if I'm in high range 4-wheel drive, which I usually am on those gravel roads, the prop shaft's spinning, and it works like a lovely little meat muncher to pretty much destroy your starter motor. And again, up about here somewhere, I'll do a still shot so you can see. There's 2 still shots. I'll see if I get to it, where you can see the damage that I caused to my starter motor housing, which goes to the next point. Fucking annoying starter motor. So even though the starter motor still worked, and I'll be honest, when it did work after it was smashed, it sounded like an air starter Kenworth. So it's fucking really cool sound, you know, the whiz sound that an air starter Kenworth does. But they've been the 2 issues with the engine. Apart from that, I haven't had any problem at all. I did do an airbox and snorkel upgrade, where I replaced all the internals in here, because this is well in excess of 4 inches, and the connection from here to the pipe running on the inside of your snorkeling grate is 4 inches, so it is a 4-inch opening. So I've got that replaced, all 4 inches on the inside, so high flow 4 inches. I've changed the airbox, and it's more than twice the capacity of air to go through it, air filter, all that sort of stuff that Brunswick diesel did, and that really livened up this V8. Where before it had the torque to do the job, but it's always felt sluggish, and you always felt a little bit underwhelmed. Now it's like fucking big grin. Fucking, I'm happy. She goes like a trooper now. Yeah, I'm really happy the way it tows that caravan. It's like it's not even there. I go up. Give you an example. I'll pull up the hills. I did it in the Adelaide hills, heading towards Murray Bridge last year. And when I was going up through there, it's quite a steep, long bloody pull, that one. And I was passing 200 series Land Cruisers with similar sizes caravans. It's like they weren't even fucking there. Yeah, it's like they were standing still. Chalk and cheese. It's just really performed it, improved its performance. And that, what I would say would be its biggest complaint about this V8. It's underwhelming. You go, oh geez, it's a 6.5 litre, 395 cubic inches. That's fucking a big V8. You know, I've got shitty mileage, and it just doesn't feel like a V8 should. And just by doing that simple thing, because diesels are very different to petrol. Diesels, they're basically an air pump where they're sucking in air, compressing it, and then they inject fuel at the last minute, bang, it ignites, and off you go. So if you can suck in maximum air rate that the engine is capable of, instead of it being a restriction of which it was before, you'll transform the way this engine operates. There's no need for expensive turbo upgrades or any of that other stuff, to do traditional horsepower, which I am sort of known for doing. I think last time I did a V8, somehow a supercharger fell on, twin screw supercharger fell onto the top of it. I don't know how that happened. Why, geez, it was good fun. But anyway, that's another issue. But that brings it up to the front axle, and fairly early in the piece, the front axle, they're an open diff. I decided to put a locker on there again as the rear axle. I put a ARB air locker on there, and that was what I did in the first place. And just in behind here, about here underneath the bonnet, that's where the compressor is to run those things. It also runs the airbags at the back, and I can adjust that on the fly inside the truck, or ute, whatever you want to call it. And also enables me to deflate the tyres for road conditions, or re-inflate them for road conditions, all that sort of stuff there. Haven't had any problems with my air lockers, right? Been rock solid, really pleased with them. Back on the starter motor issue there, to resolve that, well, actually it's a bit complex as this, because I'll go back to when I installed the V8, or actually I took it to Brunswick Diesel to install it. We noticed that the suspension, because she's in the mid 200s, was starting to do a little bit of a sag bit. So after speaking with buddy Greg down at Brunswick, we agreed that we'd just replace them. So I pulled out the paperwork so you can see what he did. And instead of putting in the 2-inch lift suspension that was at the heavier rating to keep my GVM upgrade legal, and also you've got to make an allowance. This steel rhubar is not fucking light, and that V8 engine is a damn sight heavier than the standard 3-litre diesel that it replaced. So I told him, I says, put in new suspension, new springs on there, pulled out the paperwork so I could see what it was rated at. So I wanted the heavy duties, the 2-inch lift one, so I gave it all that. What he did, he gave me standard springs and the standard ride height. Wasn't too impressed about that once I fucking began to work out what was going on, because when I drove down the road, even on bitumen, the front end was floating all over the place. His was lovely and soft, but it wasn't really what you want, or a desirable effect. So I went to a place in Armidale in New South Wales, and that's also where I got the relief springs flattened out from constant load heavy duties to load bearings to helpers, as in the load bearing there. And that's when I got the new springs in, and we worked out what we've got. I got 2-inch lift, heavy duties, EFS as it works out, put in on the front, and that's when I seen, Jesus, 2-inch, actually there's a little bit more than 2 inches when they're uncompressed, difference in the height of the springs, and I could see clearly how the difference in the heavy rating versus the non-heavy rating was, whether it's a light spring, easily compressed or not. And but anyway, that's been replaced. But also, when I was doing the Unadatas track from in South Australia anyway, heading up towards the Pink Roadhouse in Unadata, when I was in there, I heard a grinding sound. And that was when I first discovered my diff, that flange that I told you about, was rubbing on the starter motor. So that was when I realised that Brunswick Diesel had replaced the bump stop with a standard Nissan bump stop, brand new on this side, but they hadn't replaced the one on the driver's side, and it literally fell in my hand. As I touched it, it fell in half. I went, said choice words. So I wasn't impressed with that there. And I seen that they had welded a spacer on the bottom of the axle. It's in the middle of the spring, so your coil spring runs, that length and that sort of diameter, and in the middle is where your bump stop hits, your rubber bump stop hits, and they put a spacer in there, 1-inch spacer in there, but instead of using the bolt-on one, which you can buy a dime a dozen for fucking very cheap money, and putting it in there, they just cut a bit of steel, circular steel plate, put it in there and weld it in there. So now if I need to make a bigger bump stop there, or spacer, I need to drill through 1 inch of steel, which is a fucking headache itself. But anyway, they welded that in there, but they didn't do anything on the passenger side. So now the driver's side is trying to restrict on here, but the passenger side's floating around like a fucking, like a dick in a shirt sleeve, just fucking useless. So got the fucking, got the hard spacer in there, the proper one that's supposed to be in, which is a bolt-on component. put that in there, put the new rubber bump stop in place, and it was right with the heavy springs, the bump stop. I mean the new bump stops, they're still in standard Nissan at this point, and those metal spacers in there for this such occasion. So what that means is when your springs compress, it doesn't affect a rebound, it doesn't affect your suspension travel, right? For example, if I go on an off-road track and I get into Wombat Hole, the suspension, that wheel can still drop down into there to give you plenty of traction still, but it's this compression, in particular the sudden compression on a washout, that will go in and compress right the way up to the standard bump stops. And I didn't go into any really hard washouts because I managed to keep them pretty much right afterwards. And it didn't seem to. I painted the bloody starter motors that way there. I'd see a shining steel bit if that bloody prop shaft was going to be touching it again at the universal joint, and it didn't seem to affect it. But maybe it was to do with the terrain. But when I came up on here, up to Port Hedland, that's where I found that the prop shaft has now re-engaged the starter motor and caused damage. So what I've done, I've got extended bump stops, and they're quite a lot extended. They're actually rated well in excess for compression, as to they will not compress as much, which means the car just rides over the whole lot. It doesn't affect it at all from a ride and compression point. It just saves my starter motor being engaged by the prop shaft, hopefully. Right. Actually, I've had a look at the buddy compression, the engineering compression tests of this particular bump stop versus the standard bump stops, and it exceeds it well and truly. The standard ones almost get destroyed, where this here holds together and reduces the compression by near on 2 inches, which is quite substantial, so it should save my prop shaft engaging and giving my starter motor that lovely kiss, love tap or love kiss of death. Now, moving forward, also your radius arms. What else have I done? The radius arms, and this comes back to originally when the buddy mining company put in that buddy GVM upgrade, they didn't correct the wheel positioning. Now, the wheel positioning, excuse my back there, people, is where this sits in the guard, whether it sits back here or back forward. Now, I've found it was always rubbing on here on a certain position in the steering lock, and after a bit of investigation I found out the mining company, they didn't put in the offset bushes and the spacer to move the whole lot forward, because when you lift it, you lift the car, the whole front suspension moves towards the rear of the car, so it goes that way. That's not what you want. If you lift it up, you want to relocate things back to their original position so your wheelbase is the same. And it was just a simple 10mm spacer, which I got for Superior Engineering in Queensland, and ARB in Far North Queensland, because this is when I was up there at the time. I got them to get offset bushes to go in my radius arms. So I rotated the diff, so when your diff sits, where am I looking at? Diff sits here, this being the rear of the car, and the diff sits relatively flat. So that's your axles, and this is your diff here, sits relatively flat. But when you lift it, it cocks it up, so the diff is angled like that, as if it's it's been dropped 2 inches, because you changed the lift kit by 2 inches. Angles it up, brings the prop shaft closer to the starter motor, and we've covered that. And also means your universal joints are working at angles like that instead of straight. So by putting in the offset bushes on your radius arms, it flattens it out. So now it's flat to where it should be. And by putting the spacer in the back of the radius arms where they mount to the chassis of the car, it moves the whole thing forward to back where it should be. So now it's flat, it's where it should be, right? Instead of being angled, it's where it should be and positioned perfectly. So they're the issues I've had with it, and they're the issues I've corrected with the car. They may sound major, but you've got to realise the car's taken a lot of punishment. It's had a hard life. As I said, the first 178, it's abused by the miners and the mining companies. They just grab and thrash them and pound the hell out of them. They just don't look after it. I tend to look after my vehicles, hence why I found all those issues and resolved them. But where mine gives it a hard use is, one, it's in towing all the time, Also I had I get the tow bar on there. Also I had the tow bar. Again, the way they bolted it up at the mining company, they missed a set of bolts, and it was putting unusual load on there. It was causing the tow bars to pull forward and crack, so I had to get all that welded up and get the correct mounts put in. Really, fucking, you're going to put something in, do it right, and you don't have a problem down the line. You know, so it drives me nuts when people shortcut and do cheap shit and poor maintenance and poor upgrades to cars. But where I do, buddy, the hard driving, back on point, the hard driving is I'm towing all the time. So this combination, most people do this to spend 48 weeks of the year like this and 4 weeks of the year with that hooked up with it. Me, it's the other way around. When I'm driving, 90% of the time, I've got that hooked up to me. I'm either driving on nice bitumen roads, but you're still pulling 6.5 tons. Just can't get away with it. That's going to be nice. So yes, work on suspension, work on diff, on your whole drive lane, right the way from the diff to the engine at the front. It's all carrying loads all the time at its max. Hence why I got the bigger engine. I didn't worry about doing another Nissan. I didn't want to replace a fucking other Nissan. Two, the places I drive are not always sealed roads. Like when you see on my previous videos that I've done not that long ago, I went up through Mullewa up to Parabadoo and Tom Price, and it's just before I got to Parabadoo where I got to a sealed road. The rest of it is gravel road, washouts, all the stuff that's road with outback driving in WA. So I'm towing 6.5 tonne through there. I'm just putting my car through that environment, and that sort of punishment, a very high proportion of my kilometres that I travel. So so it does get a lot of I wouldn't say abuse, I'd just say a hard work out. So I've got to be up on my maintenance all the time, and hence, you know, like towing all the time, and the fact that it got thrashed and absolutely hammered by the mining workers in the previous buddy 178,000 before I got it, is what I put the gearbox down to. The engine, it's just a shit Nissan engine. You know, they're known to be a grenade, those ZD30s. But apart from that, as I said, she's a very reliable car. I suppose that doesn't make sense, but I'm going to say it's reliable. I've had a good run out of it, and I expect to get many more hundreds of thousands of kilometres out of it, towing around the place with maintenance along the way as I do. So anyway, viewers, that's my 300,000 kilometre review of Sherman, the big GU. Catch you later.